Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and welcome back to another video. Today I have an older technique with lots of tips and tricks to share with you, which is heat embossing with stencils. So my first card I'm going to make some faux lace on this background. So in order to do that, I went ahead and made a die cut from craft cardstock. I really love a background of craft with heat embossing especially. I think it pops so much. But I have a little bit of stitching on that and I want to keep those stitched edges clean and free of any embossing. So I used some painter's tape to tape that off. Then I'll go ahead and prep my surface with my embossing bag very well. I don't want any embossing powder sticking where I don't want it. Then I'll go ahead and put my stencil down. This is Growing Wild from the Crafter's Workshop. All the supplies, everything I'm using today, as usual, will be listed and linked down in the description box. I tape that down just so it doesn't move around because I'm going to start smushing my Versamark ink pad through the stencil. Now I want to smush and really make sure I get all the nooks and crannies of this stencil. So I am going to really take my time with this step. Now in order to make this look like lace, I'm going to be adding white embossing powder. But another choice that really plays a part in this looking like lace is the stencil I chose. So I chose a very flowery, florally, whatever you want to call it, looking stencil to go on this background. Now once I feel like I've gotten enough ink through that stencil, I can go ahead and remove the painter's tape before I put on the embossing powder, because if I don't, any embossing powder that gets hooked on those little edges is going to stick. It won't remove, and then you'll be left with kind of like a white border around this, but it won't be a pretty white border, I promise. So go ahead and remove your painter's tape and then go ahead and sprinkle on that embossing powder. I'm using a white embossing powder from Imagine Crafts. And then I heat set that, and I've got this gorgeous white embossed background that looks like lace, but all it is some embossing. I added a hello die cut that I built up with 3 separate die cuts and glued those together, attached those to that die cut, and put everything onto an A2 side folding card base horizontally. So a super easy card. It only took about 5 minutes to make, but I love the way this one turned out. It's very monochromatic, but that craft background I absolutely love. Now on my next card, I'm going to actually do some rainbow embossing. This is so much fun. I'm starting off with a 3.5 by 5.5 sheet of craft cardstock. Again, I am doing this on craft. You could do this on black cardstock. You could do this on white cardstock. It really is up to you. For the rainbow, I would suggest kind of a neutral color. So black, white, craft, that kind of thing. Now I went ahead and placed down my stencil. This is one of my favorite stencils. It is the Floral Spectacle stencil from the Crafter's Workshop, and it is so much fun. This would be really fun on a lace background too. But I smushed my Versamark ink pad through that stencil, and now it's time to sprinkle on embossing powders. So like I said, I'm going to do a rainbow. I have all of my different colors lined up here, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. And these are all from Imagine. I will leave them listed and linked down below. And these come in bags, so this makes it a little bit easier to do this technique. I'm working over a piece of scrap paper, and I'm just placing down lines of embossing powder, making sure to keep that embossing powder in that line. Now this is where Versamark ink comes in super duper handy, and you want to make sure you have a good layer of this on so it stays wet long enough, because this does take a while to get all the different colors of embossing powder on. So make sure you have a good layer of that so it stays nice and wet, and make sure you're cleaning up in between each one of these embossing powders. If you get it mixed together, you're going to have to toss that embossing powder. You don't want to put a mix of color back into its container. Now, whenever I'm putting on these strips of color, I am also coming up just the tiniest bit away from that strip. I'm not making it solid towards the top, and that is because I want to blend the two colors together a little bit. So then I come back over the green a little bit with the blue. That blue is going to stick wherever the green wasn't, and it'll blend those two colors together. This is going to be easier to see on my still photo in just a moment, but I'm finishing off the background with a little bit of purple. Then it is time to heat set this. This is super duper easy to do. You just use some tweezers if you don't have any space to hold, or you can just hold it and then heat set. Now this shows up really, really well on the craft cardstock, so you know when it's set. You just need to be careful that you don't overheat this, especially these really solid colors of embossing powder. They can look really funky if they get overheated. So take your time, make sure you heat everything thoroughly, but don't overheat it. Now, once I was done heating it, I've got this gorgeous rainbow background that's ready to go on my card. I want to show you a closer photo though of those blending between the colors. You can see a little bit of that blending there. Super easy to do. Just take your time with it. Make sure you have enough of that Versamark ink on there so everything stays wet long enough. There is a closer look at the finished card. All I did was add a Celebrate die cut that I built up with 3 different die cuts and glued them together. Attached everything to the left side of an A2 top folding note card. Super duper easy, but I love, love, love that rainbow background. Now for my third card, I'm going to do just a regular gold background, but I want to do a couple layers of this, and I want to show you the difference between one layer of heat embossing on your backgrounds and 2 or more. It really adds a lot to do a couple layers. So I put down my first stencil on a piece of craft cardstock, and again, I'm going to go ahead and push through my Versamark ink pad. I did prep my surface with my embossing bag, which I've done every single time. Just you want to make sure your static is down to a minimum so you don't have to do any major cleanup on these. Now, once I have enough Versamark ink through that stencil, I'll go ahead and place on some gold embossing powder. Any color of shiny embossing powder works really well for this technique. You can use gold like I'm using here, champagne, rose gold, anything like that. Silver looks gorgeous. Pearls look gorgeous. You can even do it with a white or an opaque like red like I used before, but I really love this technique with a little bit of shine to it. So once I have that covered with embossing powder, I'm going to go ahead and heat set it. This just takes a few seconds to go ahead and get this first layer heat set, but once you have it heat set, give it a little bit of time to cool before you go in for your second layer. But you can see that first layer has a little bit of bumpiness to it, not as smooth as I want it to be, especially on a very, very large background like this. It's very shiny, it's gorgeous, but I want to go one step further. And I'm prepping my surface again. You always want to do that no matter if you've already prepped it before. Once you heat set, go back in and prep it again. Then I'll line up that same stencil over the embossed area and again press through another layer of that Versamark ink, making sure that I get it into all those nooks and crannies. You're going to have a little bit of a raised area to work with, so it's not going to be as hard to do it this time. Then again, sprinkle on a second layer right over the top of that gold embossing powder. And I am keeping that painter's tape on the left-hand side there just to use as a handle because I really didn't have anywhere else to hold. But you want to make sure to try and avoid that as much as possible when sprinkling on your embossing powder so you don't waste a ton. Once I have that covered with embossing powder, I'll heat set that for a second time. And this is where it really, really comes together. You can see even as I'm heat setting this how much smoother of a surface I'm getting, and it almost looks foiled. It has so much shine to it. Plus you have that second layer of embossing which gives you even more dimension. Now I want to give you a closer look between the first and the second. So here are little still frames. The left is the first round, right second round. You get so much more smooth of a surface plus that extra dimension. It really is a fun technique, super simple and easy to do, and you don't need to add much more. I did create a little shaker component to put on this card. I heat stamped a thanks he embossed a thanks sentiment on that card to finish the whole thing off. Super simple and easy to do. This one is probably my favorite. I love the background on this one. That is going to do it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and a look at all the different ways you can do some heat embossing through your stencils. If you are interested in any of the supplies I use, don't forget to look down in the description box where you'll find the links for them down there. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching and happy crafting, everyone.